Earlier seen a few CSS selectors. Now we are going to see them again in somewhat more detail. So as we discussed earlier, CSS selectors basically define that what CSS rules are applied to which elements. For example, if in CSS I have written something like this, then this means that color red, this thing is applied to all the elements in the HTML which are div elements. Similarly, we also saw class selectors where if the elements with class attribute my class is there, then those can be targeted using this syntax where dot and that class name is written in the CSS. And the third one which we saw is ID selector, where the name, the ID name, whatever. So let's say in any HTML element, ID is equal to my ID is written, then that can be targeted using hash and then that ID which is there in the attribute, ID attribute. Okay, so now as we saw that ID selector, class selector and type selector which selects the tag name, these three we just saw. Apart from that, there is something called attribute selector and something called universal selector which we briefly looked at earlier. So this universal selector which is used to match or target elements of any type. So there are n number of elements in the HTML. All the elements can be targeted from one place universally using this universal selector. And the syntax is something like this. You write a asterisk star, and if you use that selector, then all the different declarations, CSS declarations which you use, they will be applied to all the elements in the HTML. So let's get to an example of that. So for example, let's say we have some paragraph. Okay, so let's say we have some paragraph, and in that hello world is there. Okay, we can clearly see that hello world is here. Now let's do some basic styling on simple tag selector. So this is like let's see, background color is, let's say, pink. So but when you do that, you see that there is some margin, padding, etc. So what are the elements on which these padding and margin is there? Let's say we want to get rid of them from all elements. So right now, if you see that, let's say you do something like this, that in P element, I want to remove all the margin, like the margin is 0, and let's say padding is also 0. So all the four sides, margin and padding is 0 for P. Then we refresh, then we'll see that, okay, some margin and padding has been removed, but still something is there. Okay, okay, so when this thing was not there, then it was like this, right? Let's try to do the same thing on body element. So the body part of the HTML, the root of that part is this thing. If you refresh, then again see that, okay, this side the margin has gone, but again above it is there. So actually what happens that we have to apply it not only on body but P both. If we apply at both elements, then we will see that now margin and padding has gone entirely. Now again, if you have some other type of elements and again there is margin padding on that, then we don't want to keep on writing all the rules separate, all the selectors separated by comma. We don't want to keep on doing this for all the elements, right? So what happens that you can use universal selector, that all the elements, for all the elements, please don't have any margin and don't have any padding, right? So we'll see that if we don't have this selector, then as usual we were having something like this. And now if we have something like this, then you see that margin padding is gone. Not only for this, for any in future, if we write any new elements, for all of them the margin padding will not be applied, because universally for we have used universal selector to target all of the elements in the HTML. So this is one way. And earlier we saw that if we have tag name, so definitely like here also, if we have P tag, then we can target that using P element. In div tag, then we can target that using div selector. So something like this. And we also saw class selector, where if any element is there which has a class attribute, then whatever the class name is there, dot followed by that class name, we can target that element. And in fact, in case of div, in case of id selector, which we'll see later, that should be unique. But here we know that, okay, if 5 elements are there, all are having a class is equal to, then this rule will be applied to all the elements. Okay, now see the difference between this and this. The difference between this and this is that when you use div dot my class name, this means that, yeah, apply apply it to the class attribute, elements having class attribute my class, but only for those elements which are div elements, right? So if I have, let's say, a p, a div, and div, let's say I'm writing hello 2, and let's say I have another one, let's say span. Okay, now if I do something like p, then obviously p is targeting. But if I do something like let's say class is equal to my class, and then I target this, so you see that, let's say this is also div, let's say, for example. Okay, and I change this to div, and let's have a few just line breaks for clearly watching this in the HTML. So this is like this. Now we see that this div and this div both are applied. Why? Because simply we have used div. However, if we use div dot class name, then the, and let's say here so here no class name is there, so obviously it will not be targeted. Not only that, even if we have class name but some other class name, so let's say here class name 2, then also it will not be targeted, right? Then also it will not be targeted. Only when it has this class name, then it will be targeted, you can see. Or you can do that I am having a different class name, but then I will target that separately, let's say using my class 2, and then I will give this a background color of, let's say, some other color, and then you will see that this one is pink and this one is aqua background color. So this means that the class, a particular class, if this thing is there, so you can see that others are not affected at all. Even if I give the class this, then also you see the third one is not targeted, because this is span element with class my class. But I am saying here that div element with class. If I would not use div, then it would be applied to both of them, right? And again, if we use only span, then only span element with my class will be targeted, this will not be targeted. Okay, so you can see that only this thing is targeted, this is not targeted. And why there is not whole line? Because the third element, this thing is span element. The span element is inline element, not block elements. So block elements, as we know, take the whole line. Span element will just take inline space, whatever is needed for that element. Okay, next we can have multiple classes also in the class attribute. So here we saw that just one class is there, right? But we can have something like my class and my class 1, my class and my class 1. And what do? You put a space, and then after putting space you can put as many as number. Again, you can put my class 4 or anything, right? So you can keep on writing multiple classes also. Now as we can clearly see that, yeah, we can target this using my class also, or my class 1 also. So we can do my class 1 also, and this will work fine. So let's remove others for now. Let's keep the universal selector, because rather than, we don't want to maintain padding and margin. Okay, so you'll see that my class 1 for div is there, then this will target this, right? Now my point is that, okay, I could have targeted is using div.myClass also, and div.myClass also, my class 1 also. What is the purpose of this syntax? .myClass .other class. So basically you can target multiple class names in case. So for example, let's say this thing is also my class, this thing is also my class, so everything is here in my class. So if we let's say have this thing, then obviously everything will be targeted all the div will be targeted. So this is span with my class, so obviously this will not be targeted, but all the divs with my class will be targeted, right? So we can see that both of these are targeted. Now you can see that if class name is there, then its order does not matter. So even if you write like the second class is this thing, does not matter. So any a class attribute with any of the classes as that class, that will be targeted. So here the second class is my class, here the first class, the only class is my class. So whatever div.my class, that will be targeted to both the elements. That is fine. But what if I don't want that, right? I want only div. I want only div with my class dot my class 1. Okay. Then what happens is that not only, so again you see that if you do something like this, then this is targeted, right? Again, if you do only this, see, only this, you see, you do, let's say, only my class 1, okay, then also it's targeted, right? Why are we using, why we were trying to use dot two classes? That means that actually both the classes should be present. So let's say this is also div, this is also div, right? And this is my class and this is my class 1. Then see what is happen. If I have my class here and my class 1 here, then what is going to happen is that right now this first one and third one both are being targeted because both are having my class 1. If I only use my class, then the first one and second one will be targeted because both are having my class. Okay. Now if we do something like my class dot my class 1, which means that those divs with both of these classes, only they will be matched. So only this one is the element which is having my class as well as my class 1, right? And that's why only this will be targeted. And now again, order does not matter. So you could very well write my class 1 dot my class, right? Then also it will work fine. In fact, you can change the order here also. It does not matter. Okay, just that classes should be present. That's it. So this is the syntax which I was talking about, and the order does not matter. And ID selector, which we already saw, that we have a particular element with a particular ID, then we can target that using hash. So my ID is the ID attribute, then this can be targeted using hash or pound symbol followed by the ID name which you have provided. And again, just to highlight that there should be just one and only one ID in the document. It might happen that you use same ID at multiple places, and in CSS it might work, but in JavaScript and at other places it might give you issues later. So better just use a single ID for any element, so that whatever be the element type, element name, whatever, when you have used a particular ID, then don't use the same ID in any other element's ID attribute. If you want multiple target multiple elements, then use the class attribute rather. Okay, and then use the dot notation here. And there is another way. So if ID attribute is there, actually class attribute, ID attribute, we have seen that. But in general, there can be any attribute name. Let's say some data hyphen item or something is the name of the attribute. Then that, or in general, let's say anchor element is there, then href attribute. Any attribute can in general be targeted, because you see why? Because what happens is that for ID and class we have special syntaxes, right? But if we have other types of attributes, then we might not need that. We don't have that syntax to target that. So for that we have another syntax which is called attribute selector. So this is ID selector, class selector we have seen. This is called attribute selector, where we can write the attribute name followed by whatever the attribute value we want to target. So we will see in this in detail in the next video. But now I just mentioned, because even if something like ID is equal to there, we have a special syntax hash, but then also we can use this syntax. We have, let's say, class is equal to, and we can use dot class name syntax, but still we can use like this class is equal to. Okay, so in general this syntax will work for any attribute name. And this is most useful when it is not a class or ID, some other attribute we are trying to target, then this syntax is more useful. In the next video, we'll see in more detail what is attribute selector.